So when building our backend, you'll find that most of the time we are going to be working with HTTP methods, right? So HTTP methods are just instructions that tell a web server what action to perform on a resource. So for example, the web server that we are going to be building is our backend system, right? So the HTTP methods are the ones that are going to be telling our web server or our backend what type of resource or what type of action to perform on that resource, right? So you find that we have different HTTP methods. The first one is the get method. So this get method is used to retrieve data from a resource. So you find that when we will be using our routes that exposes like our backend to the outside world, we'll be using get requests to get data from our server. And then the post request, we'll use that one to send data to create a new resource on our server, right? For example, when a user is logging in on our backend system, right, we'll use the post request, or maybe when we are posting a new job vacancy, we'll be using a post request, right? And then a put, we use the put to replace an entire resource with the provided data in the request, right? So if you want to replace a resource that is already on the database, right, it's best to use a put method, right? But if you want to partially update a resource, you use a page method. So a page is more of you are adding a page to a resource that's already there on the database. And then if you want to delete a resource on the database, we'll be using the delete HTTP method, right? And then one of the things that you will find most of in this backend course that we'll be working on is the HTTP status code, right? So you'll find that we have informational responses that is from 100 to 199. We have successful responses from 200 to 299. We have redirectional messages that is from 300 to 399. And then we have the client error responses that is from 400 to 499. And then we have server error responses that is from 500 to 599, right? And then you will find that on successful responses, mostly we'll be working with the 200 HTTP status code, right? So the 200 HTTP status code, which is okay, tells that the request has succeeded, right? And then we have the 201 status code, or created status code. This status code, it tells us that a new resource was created on our server. For example, when a new user logs in, creates an account on our system, we'll be using 201 status code to show them that a new resource has been created, right? And then we have client error responses, right? For example, a client, in this case, when working with web servers, right, we have a client and then we have a server, right? In this case, our client is our mobile application and then our server is our backend system, right? So for example, we have the 400 status code, which is a bad request. So this tells us that this server will not process the request due to something that might be a client error, right? And then we have the 401 status code, unauthorized status code. So you find that when we are working with JSON web tokens, right, you'll find that we'll be using the 401 status code to tell the client that if they are not authenticated, right? And then we have the 403 or forbidden status code. So for example, if a user's JSON web token expires, right, that means they cannot access the resource that they are supposed to access. We will tell them using the 403 status code, that is the client does not have access right to that resource, right? And then we have the 404 status code. So if you're familiar with this, you always see it in memes. The 404 status code, it just tells us that the server cannot find the requested resource, right? And then we have server error. And then the most common one on the server error is the 500, which is the internal server error, right? So this just tells us that the server encountered a situation it does not know how to handle, right?